Here we go. Income tax amendments, House Bill 225, Representative King.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. This is a very straightforward bill, straightforward concept. Back in 2008, we amended the Utah state income tax structure to provide for a single rate. Some people call it a flat tax. It really isn't a flat tax because they're on the low end of the spectrum. There are credits given to individuals who don't make enough money to pay the single rate. So you have a single rate of 5%. On the low end, you get credit for income tax if you haven't earned enough money to have the 5% triggered. At the time, we were informed that that was a revenue neutral change. However, it pretty quickly became evident that this resulted in a loss of revenue to the state income tax coffers of between $150 and $200 million. Y'all know, or should know, that all the money that goes that's raised from state income tax goes into the education fund. And as we discussed Friday, the education fund is used to fund both public and higher education. So the effect of the 2008 change was to decrease funding available in the education fund for public and higher education by between $150 and $200 million. This bill attempts to remedy that to some extent by putting into place brackets that reflect progressivity in our state income tax structure. It basically provides for an increase of the rate from 5% to 6% for individuals who make above $250,000 up to $1 million. And then it increases the rate again for individuals making $1 million and above, adjusted gross income from 6% to 7%. These are marginal increases. So you just pay the additional amount on the money above the thresholds. So don't be confused or believe that because you happen to fall in a higher tax bracket that all of your income is going to be taxed at that higher rate. It's not. If you look at the fiscal note, you'll see, oh shoot, I forgot to move an amendment.
Would you like me to move
If someone could, I'd be happy to explain it, but I need somebody on the committee to move it.
Representative Andrig.
Sure, I'll move this, that we amend House Bill 225 with First Amendment dated February 7th, 2013 at 9:14 a.m.
Would you like to speak to that?
Sure, wouldn't it?
Representative King.
Happy to. Thank you. Thank you, Representative Andrig. I appreciate your courtesy. Right after we made the bill public, the ledge drafters came to me and said, look, we screwed this up, basically. We left in there this number of 42,500 based on a prior draft of the bill. It's purely a ministerial clerical error, so it's just reflecting, it's the correct numbers, basically. So that's all.
Okay. Seeing no discussion, we'll go ahead and place that motion. All those in favor of amendment number 1, dated February 7th at 9:14 a.m., say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. It's unanimous. It's amended.
Thank you.
Return back to you.
I apologize for the oversight and not raising that initially. So if you go look at the fiscal note, you'll see that there are some significant numbers that this bill generates. It talks about the first fiscal year, $54 million, and for each year thereafter, beginning in FY 2015, $113 million per year. That'll go straight into the education fund. So we're looking at increasing some additional money for education, which we badly need, and we're doing it in a way that I think is fair and appropriate. You've all seen or heard polling that says that the majority of Utahns favor increasing income tax rates if it means that the money will go into public education. That's true. What you don't see is the more specific question of what if we increased income tax rates on those who have the greatest ability to pay, the individuals that this bill targets. I speculate, I dare say that I think it's much more likely than not that those numbers, which are already at 50% and above, slightly above 50%, will increase even greater. people recognize that those who have the greatest ability to pay should be asked to do so, and those who have less ability to pay should be asked to step up and give less because they don't have the means to give more. And I think that's a fundamental principle of fairness. I think it's good tax policy. In this, I disagree with my friends from the Utah Taxpayers Association who say that broadening the base and lowering the rate is always the solution to good tax policy. I just disagree with that. The folks who are in the best position to pay, especially when the economy is doing well, the folks who are making the most money, should be asked by us as legislators to make that contribution. If we do that, I think that we're going to improve our performance, or at least have a greater chance of improving the performance of our kids in the public and higher education systems. I've heard from people that they don't believe there's any correlation between the amount of money that we use to fund public and higher ed and the performance of our kids. I find that hard to believe. Do we really believe that we can get something for nothing? I mean, this is at odds with everything else that we believe, that if you invest in something, you're going to have, to some degree, a proportional return. It may not be a dollar-for-dollar return. Sometimes it's more than a dollar-for-dollar return if it's a good investment. But you will have investment returns that are in proportion to the amount that you invest in whatever you're investing in. I think that's true, certainly, in public and higher education. It's interesting that we've had Prosperity 2020 and the Chamber of Commerce and other business groups come to us and say, we're concerned. We need to do more to raise resources for public and higher education. Why would, if they were just concerned about money, why would they say that? Well, it's because they're concerned about money that they say that. They recognize what's true. We have, as the backbone of our ability to have future economic development in Utah, public and higher education that excels above national averages. If we fall below national averages on those points, we're going to see slower than average rates of economic development. I believe that's true. And that's just the financial angle. What about the intangible quality of life that comes from having highly educated, great resources in public and higher education? What value does that give to you? I would suggest to you that it's really critical for all of us. So this is, as I say, a straightforward bill. I'm trying to appeal to the desire for the members of the committee to provide greater resources for public and higher education, while at the same time recognizing that we have to get those resources from those who are in the best position to make those contributions. I'd be happy to answer any questions that the members of the committee have.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Gibson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd love to see those poll numbers. I've never had my constituents say raise my taxes. And the reason I say that is I live in a school district which has the second highest property taxes in the state. There have been efforts to do equalization, and and it's amazing how we see lots of Republicans and Democrats come together on issues of equalization and property tax. If we fund education, we should fund it equally. That's a scenario of we're going to take from the richer school districts who have more and give to the poor. I look at this, and what you're arguing here is that those with the ability to pay more are in a position to do so, and they should do so. I can't support that because of that. And could we use an extra $100 million every year? I think so. Yes, we could. But there are lots of other issues we have in terms of equalization with funding for public education, with taxes that we already receive before, in my mind, we go down this line and correct this one. But I do appreciate your efforts, Representative King.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Nielsen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of quick questions, and I'd like to make a couple of comments. The majority that favor these increases, what percentage of that majority would be affected by the rates you're proposing?
That's a good question, because people routinely fail to identify correctly where they are relative to the rest of society in terms of, am I in the 5% or the 1% or the top 10%? What you routinely see is an overstatement, an overestimation of whether you're there. So I can't tell you the answer to that. But when you're talking about the kind of people that this bill affects, Representative, this bill affects the 1 or 2%.
Yes.
So the great majority of individuals who talk about, the polling is not, do you want to shift tax increases to those who are doing better? The poll that I'm talking about just said, would you be willing to see an increase in income tax? Not dedicated to those who are on the high end of the spectrum. So I suppose the answer to your question is that I think most people who answer the poll think that it's going to hit them.
Well, I just, from one of the comments you made, I would deduce that there would be greater, it would be seen as more favorable if it fell to someone else, someone more wealthy, because your suggestion was the numbers would go even higher.
Yeah, I think that's true.
And so we're interested in taxing people other than ourselves. Another question I had is, you mentioned that in education, the amount of money involved makes a difference in the outcomes, and I'll grant you that. So my question is, in taxation, does the amount of money taken away from a business, does that affect, or an individual, does that affect the outcome? I mean, wouldn't it be similar to the argument about education, just the converse?
Does it affect the outcome of?
Yeah, the outcome in terms of the willingness to stay in this state, to create jobs, to that sort of thing. Does it have any effect?
I think that there might be some, and I know that's something that's raised as a concern, that if we increase the marginal tax rate on those who are on the high end of the spectrum, that will chase them out of the state. And there may be some folks that are in that boat, Representative, but honestly, if they're willing to leave Utah because they have to pay 6.5%, given all their income, rather than 5%, I don't think we want them.
Well, I appreciate that, but at the same time, if a difference in money, a proportional difference in money in education makes a difference, I think a difference in money that we take from people would also make a difference in their purchasing power and their ability to hire, or even their willingness to stay here. Money does make a difference. Again, it's straight economics. It's incentives. What we keep versus what we don't get, what we invest, those things all affect behavior. Isn't that true?
Oh, sure. But what I'm trying to provide the committee members is information that's a lot more solid, that says, people who are polled and say, you want your income taxes increased if it goes to public education, they say, the majority of people say yes. And that's been true for year after year after year.
Yeah, as was noted previously, I'm not, it hasn't been my experience dealing with my constituents, and also personally, I happen to be involved in a business that, because of the nature of our business, the first dollar of our taxes is tax of corporate taxes, and that would affect this as well, I believe. But the first dollar is taxed at the maximum rate. That means 44.5% now of any dollar we declare as income is gone. I had a constituent come to my house and sit in my living room and talk to me about the fact that he and his wife and their family pay $450,000 in income tax. And this individual, who would be affected by your bill, was not asking me to increase his taxes. He was more adamant about his tax situation than anyone I have talked to, actually. And his effective total tax take, looking at all the taxes he pays, including property tax and sales tax, the best he could calculate was almost 70%.
Well, I think that person needs to see a new accountant. I don't think seriously, those numbers make absolutely no sense to me, Representative. If that person making that kind of money can't find a way to reduce his tax rates down to below what you and I are paying as relatively average individuals, and I'll bet there's a problem, because you and I both know what the effective tax rate of the wealthiest people in our society is much lower than a person making $70,000 or $80,000 a year. That's the reality.
Well, I don't know, maybe
We need to make sure and keep this. You ask a question, and yeah.
I just have a couple things I want to finish with.
Okay.
Our 5% tax rate in the state of Utah is for corporations and for individuals, because, face it, most businesses are taxed as individuals, either through partnerships or S corporations or through sole proprietorships. That is a significant selling point across the nation. If that becomes 7%, that will change our ability to attract business and to attract economic development. And for this reason, I have concerns and will not support this bill.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Cosgrove.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a couple of questions and maybe a comment. Representative, you had mentioned the loss from income tax going to education when we changed from a bracketed tax to a flat tax. Can you give me an amount that was going to education fund before that?
You know, I don't have the gross amounts, Representative, but I know that the folks who I've talked to in the fiscal analyst's office to try and get at that number, they tell me it's between 100 and 200 million. That was the loss to the education fund. You asked, I think, what the gross amounts was. I don't know. It was probably $2 or $3 or $4 billion, something like that. So we lost a percentage of that total, and I don't know what the percentage was exactly, but I know that the discrepancy was between 100 and 200 million dollars.
So at least between 100 and 200 million. You know, I served on public education appropriation for 8 years, and the status quo is just not working. We have a 25% dropout rate, and we have an even bigger amount of our students, 50% of those students that are graduating are the only students that are going on to a higher education. Our English as a second language learners are not going on to receive a higher education. And if we want an educated workforce, we're going to have to invest in them. We need to encourage companies, businesses to locate to our state that want that educated workforce. We want to bring in the higher job-paying salaries, the kind of jobs in biotechnology, that the students have the opportunity to receive the best education that we can provide for them. But we're not doing that. And we've gone in our state budget from a $3.4 billion budget in education down to $2.4. So at least dropping $1 billion with tax cut changes, with the downturn in the economy, yet we continue to have more students from in-state population growth coming into our state. Our students are still struggling, and we've got to do a better job. I don't know that this is the only way, but I definitely think it's worth consideration, and I appreciate you bringing it forward.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Frower.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple questions, if I might. So looking at the fiscal note and the potential net impact, what percent of the current state budget that we put toward education would this increase, if this bill was to go forward? What difference would it make, or what would be the delta between this and where we are right now?
Well, as I say, Representative, I believe, and I could be wrong about this, Representative Briscoe and others who are more conversant with the education fund and the not just the education fund, because we supplement the education fund with general fund monies for public and higher education. But my recollection is that the percentage increase would be in the neighborhood of between 2-3%, something like that. It would be less than 5%. In other words, I think the total amount that we spend on public and higher education is something like $4 or $5 billion. Okay. But even if it's lower, even if it's $3 billion, you're still at less than 5% increase with that $113 million that you've got here.
Thank you for that. And the numbers I've run, I think I'd put it somewhere between 2 and 3%. But my next question is the 2 or 3%, is this amount of money worth what I would call pain to some of our taxpayers in this state to increase the level of education? Is this enough to do any good measurable so that we're going to see any performance increase?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, we'll never know until we start allocating more funds for public and higher ed, I think. The supposition is that until we reach a certain amount, some magic sum, it's not worth doing at all. Or at least, I'm not saying that's what you're saying. I'm just saying I think that we've got to get away from the idea that incremental gains in terms of how we fund public and higher education are not worth pursuing. $100 million is a lot of money. And we've been talking about finding money for growth in public education. The governor's budget talks about that. The governor's budget talks about early intervention programs, K through 3, things like that. Senator Osmond, I can't remember the name of his bill, but Senator Osmond has a bill that talks about sort of a combination public-private venture to raise funding for K through 3 education. It's like 20 or 30 million. And people say, oh, boy, that's great. It's a lot of money. And it is a lot of money. So I don't think that the kind of numbers that we're looking at here are so low that they can be dismissed out of hand as not worth the cost that's associated with introducing some progressivity back into the income tax structure.
Thank you. And one last question is, so as I look at the provision in your bill to increase the mill levy on the certified revenue levy, that would, in my opinion, go across all levels of business and individuals if their property taxes go up, not just the high income. Would that be correct or not?
What line are you at, Representative?
I'm actually reading on the fiscal note.
Oh.
That the potential increase of the .001651.
And where are you on the fiscal note?
I'm on, this is expenditures to Utah residents and businesses.
Oh.
Representative, are you looking at Representative Briscoe's bill?
Oh, excuse me. Okay, I'm looking at the wrong bill. Thank you.
Yeah,
that concerns me, but I'll talk about that in the next bill.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Gibson?
Just one quick question. Hypothetically, we just did away with state income tax and increased the property tax.
Yeah, you could do that. Some states do that, obviously. Florida, no state income tax.
Texas,
Nevada, Wyoming.
big business pouring in there, no state income tax.
Well, I don't know if big business is pouring in there. I mean, Utah, we have a state income tax, and Utah's economic development over the last 2 or 3 years, I'll stack it up against anybody. I mean, you can make an argument that would do better off in terms of attracting businesses if we got rid of the state income tax, but there's a constitutional issue, of course, there.
Is. I'm just.
But I think that, we tout ourselves rightly as having tremendous economic growth the last 3 or 4 years relative to other states. And, apparently the existence of a state income tax hasn't been too much of a burden on that economic growth.
Thank you, Representative. Signal for the lights. We'll go ahead and go to public comment. Is there anyone here to speak to this one? Okay. Just come on up. Let the games begin. Just have no woodchuck jokes this time.
Again, my name is Royce Van Tassel with the Utah Taxpayers Association. I think I should say, it's probably evident to you on the committee, but I think I should nevertheless say, there aren't many people I enjoy spending more time with than Representative Brian King. That said, there aren't many people I disagree more violently with than Representative Brian King.
Because he's crazy.
He raised the question about the connection between spending and student achievement in reference, I suspect, to comments that I brought up last Friday. And I think that it's worthwhile to explore briefly what some of that means. There was a new study that came out last week that says, where did all of this additional spending that we've had, that I talked about, real per pupil dollars spent have doubled, and student scores have stayed flat since 1970. This new study from the Friedman Foundation says, let's take a look at percentage change in the number of students in Utah schools, actually all of them, it includes Utah, and the percentage change in staffing. And perhaps the most remarkable number there, 1992 to 2009, a 23% increase in the number of students in Utah schools, a 69% increase in the number of non-teaching staff in Utah schools. Now, I'm sure there are many and complex reasons to explain why student or additional spending hasn't translated into more achievement. However, clearly spending more money on non-teaching staff is one of them. So vote against the bill.
Okay, next. Whoever would like to speak, please come up quickly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Allison. Oh, come on.
I'm going to blame that on Phil.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Allison Rowland from Voices for Utah Children. I would actually like to express our appreciation for Representative King for bringing this bill up. In general, I would urge people to think about the importance of a direct link between whatever bill they're trying to make and the outcomes they want to see. And I think this is a model of that kind of clarity. There's no complicated formulas involved with this bill in terms of how it would increase funding for public education. He goes straight to the point. I also think it's important to keep in mind, and if you don't mind, Mr. Chair, I'd like to pass out a handout regarding the regressivity of state and local taxes in Utah. Would that be all right? Handout?
Quickly.
Thank you. As you can see from this handout, in general, Utah's state and local taxes are regressive. That is, they take a higher share of low-income people's earnings from low-income families than they do for higher-income families. And if you look down below to those to the information further down on the page, it's sales and excise taxes, as well as to a certain extent property taxes, which are really responsible for this regressive nature of Utah taxing. So to the extent that we're able to modify, to mitigate this regressiveness through the income tax, I think that is a positive thing for Utah families and for low-income families in particular. Finally, I do want to mention, since it has been brought up, in general, when tax specialists talk about broadening the base and lowering the rates, it's a conditional phrase. In other words, if we broaden the base, we can lower the rates. It is not, let's do both of these things at once. We have to remember that education costs money. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You got 3 bonus seconds for
you, sir.
the mistake there. Thank you. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is Jay Blaine. I'm the Director of Policy and Research for the Utah Education Association. And I speak to you today about this bill in terms of listening to what the business community has recommended. I don't speak for the business community, obviously, but the concerns that have been brought up by members of the committee today are relevant in what the business climate is in this state. Now, Utah has been recognized to be one of the most friendly states for business in the United States. But we hear groups such as Prosperity 2020, which represents the many of the chambers of commerce in the state, calling for an investment in education in our state, both higher ed and public ed, which draw from the income tax. And the reason is when companies come to locate in Utah, what do they ask about? They ask about the workforce. They ask about the quality of schools. And the reason is this is the human resource they're looking for their companies. And they are calling for an investment in public education for this reason. When the flat tax, as it is called, was instituted in 2008, public education took a hit to the tune of about $200 million, or a little above that. This would help restore some of that hit that was taken. That, along with the great economic downturn that followed caused the state to suffer in many areas, and income tax collections was one of those areas that hurt education along with many other areas of the state. Now that we're coming out of that, this would help restore some of the investment in education that we need. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Boyack.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, my name is Connor Boyack, Libertas Institute. I think it's perhaps insufficient to consider this bill a tax bill. I see this bill as a discrimination bill. So I actually look forward to seeing how the sponsor votes in regards to other anti-discrimination bills that will soon be coming up. On a personal note, my parents were up here this past weekend, and they were looking around for where to build a home. I'm from California, born and raised, and they're leaving after several decades. And of the many reasons, grandchildren being one of them, the tax burden is very, very high on the list. There was an article in the New York Times 4 weeks ago titled, the lead-in sentence, "It is getting awfully expensive to be a millionaire in California." And it documented the exodus that state is experiencing. In fact, it noted the efforts of Governor Rick Perry of Texas. It says that he fired a new shot in an old interstate war, and he began putting radio advertisements on the air in California this week, summoning burdened businesses his way. Quote, "I have a message for California business. Come check out Texas." And then the New York Times article ends, "Blood, it seems, is in the water." Now, as a state that does have a reputation for making proactive and many repeated attempts to attract out-of-state business into the state, I submit to you that this bill would be quite the opposite direction that we would want to go if we want to maintain and increase that status. Whether you take my parents' example anecdotally or hundreds, if not thousands, of other anecdotal stories that can quickly be Googled, this is a discrimination bill, and this would take us in the opposite direction of being able to continue to attract economic development in the state. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that it? All right. Seeing no further public comment, we return to the committee for action. Discussion. Representative Briscoe.
Move that we pass this bill out, HB 2, hey, come on, HB 225 with a favorable recommendation.
Okay. We have what's our number again? Motion to pass House Bill 225 with a favorable recommendation as amended, I believe. Would you like to speak to that?
I've got a study done by 2 Stanford economists that says the only millionaires who are moving out of California are those who got divorced. The others are staying put. They have an awful lot of sunk costs. I also have data from the Salt Lake Tribune article of a study done by Exoro, Dan Jones, Center for Review of Views, Center for Public Policy and Administration, showing that 69% of Utahns said they probably or definitely support an increase in taxes to pay for increased salaries for Utah's public school teachers. The downside of these surveys is you do 500 people and you get a pretty good statewide sample, but we don't do 500 people for each 75 districts, so that may not hold true across the state. But if you understand anything about economics, if 70% of the people in the state of Utah feel that way, there's going to be variations across the state, of course. I'm in favor. I think we should vote for it. Let's vote.
Okay.
After everyone has their say.
Seeing no further lights, would turn to the sponsor for summation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Listen, our tax burden, it's very clear that when you look at studies that have been done on this by credible sources, the tax burden that we have federally, and it's the same is true at the state level, is lower than it's been in 50 or 60 years. Those are the facts. That's one of the reasons we have the deficits that we have on a federal level. And it's one of the reasons that we have the structural deficit that we have on the state level, where we struggle each year to do such basic things as fund increased class sizes for public education. So I have very limited sympathy for the idea that we're overtaxed. And quite honestly, I used a word Friday when we were talking about the severance tax bill in terms of our lack of willingness as legislators to consider any tax increases. Cowardly. Cowardly is what I think we are as legislators at times. And I think the other thing that we do sometimes is we pander to the belief that our constituents are going to punish us if we vote for any tax increases. I don't think that's true. I especially don't think it's true when, as with this bill, we have it carefully targeted to ask those who are in the best position to step up and pay a little more to do so. I just think that this is an important bill at this time. We talk all the time about, how tough we are and how resilient and self-reliant we are here in Utah. We're rugged individualists. We have no backbone on this issue. We really don't. One or two things is going on. Either we don't believe that money has any correlation to improved performance in public and higher education, which my good friend Mr. Van Tassel says, or we do believe that there's a correlation, but we're too afraid to say we need to do something about it. I think that we do have a correlation and that we need to show some courage and do something about it. It's especially easy to show some courage and do something about it when the polling suggests that people who are asked, do you want to see income tax increases if it goes to public education, between 50 and 60% say yes. And that's not asking for income tax increases to be assessed to those who are doing well. That's income tax increases, period, end of story. So, the idea that, and I love my good buddy from Mapleton, I think the world of him, but never had anybody say, please raise my taxes. That's exactly what they're saying. And they're saying it with a majority voice, if you believe the polls. Now, you can say, I don't believe the polls, or I'm not hearing it from my constituents. Well, I can't help you there. But I do think I'll trust a poll that's done to the kind of specifications that makes for good polling more than I'll trust the 500 questionnaires that I get back from folks in my district. Because I know the questionnaires that I get back from the folks in my district are being sent to people that are certain folks. They're not selected to be a representation of a cross-section of our society in the same way that reputable polling is. So one final point. I know I don't want to take too long. There was a comment made about the low tax rate that we have in Utah as a selling point for business and individuals to come here. I get it. And to some extent that's true. But let me tell you something that is not a selling point. 51st in the country for per pupil spending on public ed. I'll take the word of our business community on this as to what's a bigger concern from their perspective. Is it marginal increases in our state income tax on those who do best? Or are they most concerned about 51st in the country on spending? I hear loud and clear, we all hear loud and clear from the business community, the Chamber of Commerce, Prosperity 2020, what's most important, what their biggest concern is. Their biggest concern is the lousy levels of funding for public ed we have. Public and higher ed need to be funded at greater sources. We need to do something about it. Let's step up to the plate on this.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Briscoe?
Waive.
Okay, with that, we'll go ahead and place the motion. All those in favor of passing HB 225 as amended, say aye.
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 All those opposed, say nay. Nay. The ayes, please raise your hand. Representative King, Representative Briscoe, Representative Cosgrove. The motion fails to pass.